We're here with Mr. Dennis Cottrell today, and Dennis, what is on your heart right now?
Well, the thing right now is what's going on in the country and the relationship in the church about abortion.
Okay.
And its relevance. There's so much division, and people are many times on the extremes of both sides. And so much of the country is divided, and I can remember back in the 70s and 80s when this issue from the Supreme Court was first passed.
And you were a pastor at the time?
I was an associate at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was kind of interesting to me that, I just kind of accepted it as the nation going south on us in a sense, that we expected that things are going to get worse spiritually over a period of time, and that the Supreme Court's ruling was just a segment of that. And I never thought seriously that it would ever be overturned. I was passive. I guess I prayed about it, but I wasn't one of those that was demonstrating and angry about it, that sort of thing. I just accepted it as things are going from bad to worse.
Why is that?
Well, because again, it was the Supreme Court, and I thought, well, the Supreme Court, that's kind of the final thing here in our country, and so I saw people who were willing to burn abortion clinics, willing to kill people, create fires, and that sort of thing. And I felt then, and I feel now, that's not the right response. That's not what we need to do. And I think now, even as believers now, how they respond to this Supreme Court ruling in relationship to the unbelievers, that how we verbally react and how we react to this, in a sense, is still so very, very important, that we don't drive each other further apart. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that both groups are guilty of communicating the other's beliefs inappropriately, mischaracterizations.
So somebody who's listening or watching this, can you give some examples of that to help them kind of visualize what it is that you're seeing?
Again, let's say as believers, as a believer, you'll see the unbelievers oftentimes really angry at what the Supreme Court has overruled. And their anger is expressed in a lot of almost not riots, but almost just right beneath that level of rioting, a lot of anger that they express. And then sometimes we as believers turn right around and do the same thing in the sense of words that we use to describe the other's perspective. And what I've learned over the years is that I need to be listening, I need to hear, and I need to think about what I'm saying. I believe in pro-life, and I believe that conception is something that God uses, and that and the wonder of and the beauty of a baby's development. I don't believe a baby's life just begins at the first breath after birth. I believe that child, that fetus, is precious in God's eyes, and I value that. But I've also learned, and I have begun to understand, I begin to empathize with people who find themselves in circumstances many times not of their making. Rape, for example, abuse, extreme poverty. And so what happens is I've tried to be more sensitive to what people are saying about it. It doesn't change my view. It changes how I react to them.
Okay.
And that perspective, I believe, is something that we as Christians need to take in consideration. Most of our communication is not just with words, but it's our body language.
Right.
So I believe that in this time in our life in our nation, that Christians need to be listening. We need to be involved in what the solutions are. I know that many times the non-believers and those who are pro-abortion do not realize the amount of effort that churches go through with Christians who are trying to take care of the unborn and those who find themselves pregnant without the necessary means to take care of that child. We're not interested in just their birth. We're interested in taking care of those children.
Their life.
And I know that in the Christian community is very much involved in adoption. And most churches have active programs dealing with those issues. Oftentimes those people do not, or the unbelievers do not necessarily, are not familiar with what we're doing.
Right.
But as I say that, I'm also aware that that we as Christians need to step up even more. It needs to be perhaps a higher priority. I do remember as a teenager that when someone was pregnant out of wedlock in high school or something, that oftentimes those people were whisked away, and oftentimes those young mothers found themselves ostracized, even within the church. And I think that's tragic. I think that the answer, again, is to come alongside them. Just as Jesus told the Pharisees, he who's without sin cast the first stone. Well, and I think the churches today have done a better job of that. I think in our own church that we would surround people with love and with provisions and do our best to encourage and help them make good decisions, knowing that we've all made mistakes and made bad decisions in our life. So anyway, I think again there's a lot of misunderstanding on both camps, and a lot of the polarization that we're seeing politically. There's also polarization spiritually as well, and so therefore I think it's very, very important that we listen, that we consider our words, that we consider our responses, and that we don't have to become we don't have to drive people away. I think we need to act as salt in this situation and take time and listen, and at the same time we stand for what we know is right.
So what role do you think that social media plays, for better or worse, in this this debate between these two camps that you're talking about? I think we all have seen it, we've experienced it, but what is your perspective on social media? Is it helpful to allow for more dialogue, or is it detrimental because of the anonymity?
It just depends on how things are said and done. It's both, but too much of it, a majority of it, is detrimental because they're captivating those moments and anger, and it seems like if it draws attention to the people and events that are miscommunicated and misunderstanding. So I think there's a sense that media makes it worse, But I also think that if we are responding rightly, and I'm talking about in a Christ-like way, that it can be positive at times. So it's both, but it's still it's a very complicated subject. I think about the medical issues, and I know so little about that, and I've just recently going back, and since all this has transpired with the Supreme Court, I am trying to become more knowledgeable and of what we can do and what's taking place, and again listening to the issues involved. I think one time you explained that you and Whitney had gone through something like this in relationship of the embryo implanting itself in what was the
ectopic pregnancies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Explain what that means.
So that is thankfully we never had to deal directly with that, but that was one of the things that I guess is a fear for a lot of women, and Whitney included, is when the sperm and the egg fertilize. If it's in the uterus, then you're good to go. You'll have a normal pregnancy. But it's when the egg and the sperm fertilize in the fallopian tubes.
Okay.
Which is such a tiny little area.
Yes.
That's called an ectopic pregnancy, that something like that, the life of the mother is in fact truly in danger.
Yes.
Because it's such a tiny tube, and so as that embryo becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, then something is going to happen, and it could be detrimental to the mother.
Yeah, I think it'd be life-threatening, and most likely. And there's, it's like that's an example. I don't know what the percentage of pregnancies are, but I know over the years that I've heard that in the past that's always a danger. And I think there's a sense there that if we automatically say that under no circumstances is abortion the right thing to do, well, I would disagree. In that situation, I would think that would be the right thing to do.
Well, I think a lot of people live in, not such a black and white world. I think a lot of people live in the gray area and understand that there is a gray area, that if you say absolutely no abortions whatsoever, period, point blank, all of that, most people, I don't think, share that view, because they do have compassion, they do have empathy. Not saying that those people don't, but when it comes to something like the safety and the health and well-being of the mother, if her life is in danger, that exceptions can be made. And I would like to educate myself on the state of Arkansas, that once the Roe versus Wade was kicked back to the states, when it was overturned, that Arkansas immediately banned abortions. And and I could be wrong about this, I don't believe it is zero abortions whatsoever, period. We are a respect life state, but when I talk about kind of the average person, I think most people with common sense see that there can be exceptions to that.
Yeah.
I think what most people think is they don't want the unnecessary killing of life because of someone's careless mistakes.
Yes.
That abortion should not be a form of birth control. For medical reasons, I believe that most people think that there are some exceptions, rape, incest, and the health of the mother. But then on the other side, that when we believers look at the other side, the opposing argument to that everyone who is in favor of keeping Roe versus Wade on a federal level, that they are not pro-abortion, that there is a gray area, that it should be, the woman's right to be able to do that. Now, some people hold that view, but there are exceptions on both sides, I guess, is what I'm talking about, that it's not so black and white, which is what you were making the point about earlier.
Yeah, that's what's important to me is finding that reasonable and understanding in a broader sense this issue, and because I don't think it is black and white. I think there really are situations. I think I used to I was a director of the Northwest Arkansas Children's Shelter for a couple of years, and I saw hundreds of children in the system, foster care system. Many of them have had experiences of being pregnant at a very early age. And you're talking about sometimes children 11, 12 years of age. And it doesn't make it easier. And I'm not saying that would be an automatic an abortion. It just depends on it. There's so many other variables in there. But I just think that it's important that we consider all those. And I don't know to what degree, you talked about the people in the gray area. I don't know what percentage it is, because the people who are extremes on both sides are the ones that are doing the not talking but the shouting.
The loudest in the room are going to get the attention.
That's right.
And
I don't know what.
That's what we see.
Yes, that's what we see and hear, and so therefore I'm not. I don't have a feel whether that middle group how they feel about it. But I think it takes a lot of wisdom and the wisdom of Solomon, so to speak, to kind of sort through those issues. And I think one of the things that we find over a period of time is that people who are in those situations where incest is taking place and where there's just unbelievable poverty involved in. I don't know what the answers are, in the sense of how do we help those children, and but I would anticipate now that the Supreme Court has ruled that we're going to have in the next 5 years an explosion of new births, and whatever we're doing in the churches will need to be, I think it's going to be important that we increase our responsibility to take care of those children, and many of them are going to be unwanted. One of the issues sometimes is if a child feels that they're unwanted, how does it affect their life? And I was one of those kids, not because my parents didn't want me, but because after my mother died, it was interesting that my dad just did not have was not equipped or did not make the right decisions. And so my brother and I was especially aware that we both were burdens. And he looked for almost any opportunity to farm us out with somebody else for $25 a month. And so we stayed with a lot of people that it just wasn't a good situation. Now, it doesn't mean that God can't work through that, because he does. But I think we got to listen to each other and at least develop a sense of empathy with people who are going through those difficult times for whatever reason.
Do you think that with your younger years, not that you're an old man, but your younger years, when you were in ministry, has your perspective changed on that level of empathy towards others? Do you think that it has gotten stronger as you have gotten older,
Yes.
especially with what you had talked about as growing up in the foster care system and being bounced around from place to place and things like that? How has that kind of shaped your view of God's grace over time and empathy towards others?
Well, it has increased. It has increased my empathy. I look at things differently now. I'm not as judgmental as I once was. I'm not as legalistic about things. I also see how God worked through those circumstances, and in spite of those circumstances, bringing me to the right people, putting me in circumstances where believers really did enter my life and became involved in my life. And they played a key role in helping me. So it really means to me that as Christians, we can not just be aloof and be distant, but we find ourselves doors opening and people coming into our lives, and people really are involved with us in some of the dirty details of our lives, that not judging us, but in the sense coming alongside to help us, to extend that hand. And I look back and I'm convinced that God brought so many people in my life that helped. When I look at my kids now, I'm so thrilled because they're independent, they're good citizens, they're strong believers, and they're great parents. And so as I see that, I think, boy, that wasn't so much because of me, but that God brought people into their lives. And a lot of the credit goes to their mother, but the bottom line is still a lot of people came in and came alongside my life at a very crucial time in my life. So I think that I've become less critical, less judgmental, and empathize with people, care for people, and not just in name only.
Do you think that the church should be doing a better job at that?
Yes, I really do. I think it's important, and if we could, I don't know the answers. Sometimes the foster care system works, and many times it doesn't, and there's not an automatic thing for all. There's no easy answer. I don't believe in the long run that God ever intended for government to raise our children. I think the family is still the unit that does it, that happens. But I do believe that even as believers, we could be better educated and more informed, and be looking for those opportunities within our communities for the church to be more involved in the lives like that. And it's not just being in the four walls of the church, but there's just so many times where God will use those believers in the church to reach out to those kids. Sports programs where coaches are having an influence, teachers, child care workers, and that in some ways it needs to be a higher priority within the church financially, and to promote a culture of adoption within the church. Now again, adoption doesn't always work out, because I've seen it many times it doesn't, but I also seen many times it does. And so therefore I believe that in the Christian community, the churches ought to be more proactive in reaching out to those children who are without families. I remember several years ago a family of 3 boys came in who had been taken out of their home, who had been tied down by ropes. And so their ankles were literally scarred from every night they'd have to be tied down by ropes to keep them in the house. Well, when you're talking about that kind of parenting, they need to be out of the home, and those children need to be adopted. And reunification is not really the option. But we've got to have Christians who are stable and consistent and mature to adopt that children or families involved.
Should that be natural to believers? In your opinion, should that be just a natural instinct to want to do that? I mean, we know that the book of James talks about true religion is caring for widows and orphans. Mm-hmm. Should that be something that comes naturally to believers, or is it just simply nowadays we don't have that in our faces the entire time?
Yeah. maybe a little bit of both, because again, the Holy Spirit can lead us and does lead us to do things, and there are many strong Christians who have the ability to adopt who do not have the desire to adopt. And I would say that anybody that has the desire to adopt is probably being led of the Spirit, because again, that's not. I don't know that that's normal, because we're all kind of selfish. So I think that's a good thing. But I also think that believers culturally could be teaching that, and if we're raised in an environment where we see the success and we have the friendships, and we're rubbing shoulders with those people who have gone through that, and they're meaningful relationships now, that would help create that desire to do that. And I think as the church of or Christendom today, that would be a good thing, and I think it would have influence over a period of time.
Because you and I were talking last week about this very topic, and for me growing up, I never knew anyone who was adopted that I was aware of, or who was in the foster care system. I just in my roving military bubble, where we move from place to place to place, I'm sure I came across some of them, but I just wasn't very cognizant of that. And so the opportunity was never there. It was kind of out of sight, out of mind for me. But with Whitney and her family, her brother is currently, he's a pastor in Wichita, that they currently have a foster boy living with them. In fact, I got to hang out with him this past weekend, and just a sweet little boy. I mean, just a really good-natured little boy. He just happens to come from unfortunate circumstances, and so the Kansas State Bureau of whatever their acronym is up there. But what they do is they find these families that are willing to open their homes and allow this child to be around their other 3 children, and to fit in and to show this kid love. And he called them mommy and daddy this weekend. And so my point is that now I have been exposed to it. Am I more apt to look at foster care in the future now that because it has kind of fallen in my lap?
Yeah,
absolutely. It's simply exposure to that. And so growing up, didn't have exposure to it, so it was out of sight, out of mind. But now that I have been exposed to it, it's a little bit different. I'm more open to that. And of course, Whitney has always been open to that because of her the way that she was raised, and the exposure that she had with people that she grew up with.
I think that's absolutely right. It's just that exposure makes a difference, and when you have a positive exposure to it, that just reinforces. Because we have the ability to really influence the community through that system. And again, it's I don't believe that ultimately that God intends for the foster care system to be our best result. I think that could be a temporary at best, and that what we want is to bring those children into our homes and love them and take care of them as our own. But that's a big challenge. I go back and look at my grandparents, how they took me and my brother in. I was 10 and my brother was 14, and took us into their home. We'd never seen him before. They didn't know what they were getting into, and we got off the bus, and all of a sudden we were there on the farm with them. That was a major decision on their part, because they didn't have to do that. And I think about how my life would have been so much different if I had remained on the streets in downtown San Jose, California. It would have been a whole different world. So anyway, I'm convinced that that when we talk about this whole thing of abortion and pro-life, that for sure we can do a better job by not shouting at one another, that we listen with a sense of love and Christ-likeness, and that sometimes, not all, sometimes, all the time, a soft answer turneth away wrath. And we need to learn as Christians that no matter how much the other person is shouting at us, that somehow, some way, we need the grace of God to help us understand that that soft answer is still the best answer.